Believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you, I'm going to prepare a place for you? I will go prepare a place for you. I will come back and take you to be with me, so then you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know the way. We don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the truth and life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
In my first full-time pastor's appointment, I had a favorite place I used to visit, and it wasn't really a place, it was a person. Her name was Helen McConnell, and she lived 3 miles east of the Lone Tree Corner. Now, if you go to Geddes, South Dakota right now, and you go try to find the 3 Mile Corner, or the Lone Tree Corner, you will not find it. It was cut down in 1970, and they still call it the Lone Tree Corner. But if you go 3 miles east of that Lone Tree Corner, you will see this very humble, simple house. And that was the place I used to go when I got pretty discouraged in my ministry. It was pretty much every other day, but in my first years. And I would go to Helen's house, and she was such a good listener. And I used to love to tell her everything that was going on. She never told anybody. That helped too. And the second thing is she had great cookies, so I would often go there for the cookies. And then, as a favor maybe to her, I would sometimes listen to her. She had lost her husband the year before, and so oftentimes she would break into tears sharing about her husband. But one time I went there, in fact, I can tell you the exact date, August 29th, I went to visit her, and she had some flowers. And she said, get in the car, we're going to the cemetery. I thought, okay, we must be going to put flowers on her husband's grave. But we didn't. We didn't go to put flowers on her husband's grave. We went to the cemetery, and we went to this cottonwood tree, and there Helen placed some flowers under this cottonwood tree and just began to cry. And she told me that on August 29th, her brother died, 1943. He was lost. He was training there at Whidbey Island on a flight for World War II, the Pacific Arena. They were going to head out in about 3 or 4 weeks. And they took off on a flight, and they were flying up around Mount Baker, and they lost connection with, radar. And so radar couldn't find them, so they asked all the planes to fly back, and that plane did not come back. And so they went and searched, and they searched, and they searched, and they searched for that plane. They knew it was somewhere around Mount Baker, but they thought maybe they had gotten lost. It was foggy that day, and maybe they went out into the sea, and they got lost in the Sound somewhere. But they never found that plane. And Helen shared with me how hard that was, not to have that human being, her brother, in her arms and be able to place that human being back to God and put that human being, that body, back in the ground at home, in her hometown, his place. And she always felt like he was just kind of out there in pieces somewhere, and just couldn't seem to put it all together. Well, believe it or not, 51 years later, there was a hiker from Mount Vernon. He was a plumber, and he was hiking Mount Baker, and he was hiking up there somewhere. He took a wrong turn, and he found the wreckage to this plane. And in the wreckage, they found 6 bodies. And one of the bodies was Robert Gray. That was Helen McConnell's brother. And so I was in a different pasture at that point. I was in Mitchell, South Dakota, and she gave me a call, and she was just crying with excitement that, hey, they found my brother, and he's coming in on the plane. And she told me when, and so I met her there. Her other pastor, who was now there at Geddes, met her there too, and lots of her friends and family. And we went, and we took his remains, and we buried him under that cottonwood tree. And I have to say, there were a lot of tears, but there were also great tears of joy. It was a jubilee time. It was a time where we were celebrating that he was finally put to rest, and she could go on and live her life and not have to hold all those pieces, you know. And I was thinking about Helen this morning, or as I was writing this sermon, and I was thinking that all of us are kind of that way, right? We have things we have to hold, don't we? It's so hard to hold them sometimes. We hold so many things in our lives, so much grief, so much pain, so much brokenness, so many mistakes, so many times people have hurt us. And it just gets heavy, doesn't it? I know it does for me. How do we deal with that? In a funeral or a memorial service, there's a favorite part I have in a memorial service or a funeral. And by the way, I know the Pacific Northwest isn't very good at funerals, or we don't like to do them, it seems like, you know, but hey, I think they're really important for us. I don't think we just do it because it's habit. We do it because there's something very meaningful in those services, not only for the family, but for the community. So I encourage us to do that. But one of the things we do is after we share memories and after there's a message about God's grace and mercy, we take that body symbolically, if we have ashes or if we have the body, and we lift that spirit and body back up to God. And that is hard to do. It's difficult. It is for me anyway, because first of all, I know God is amazingly merciful. And there are some times, folks, I'm still mad at somebody. Then I have a hard time when they pass away because I don't really want to give them to that God yet. You know, I want to hold on to the righteousness, you know, the anger. I still want to hold on to that. Or I just have loved them so much. I'm not ready to let go. I just can't, you know, I just have too much. I want to live more with this person. But there is just this time of just lifting that person up and letting go and letting God. And there's such a blessing in that. Now, I must have to say, rarely does it happen at the funeral. I mean, we try it. It's a ritual, right? It's something, but it does happen after a while. If we keep doing that, we can let go and let God so that we can really remember, put that person's life back in a different way without all that other stuff we're carrying. And so I sometimes wonder how to go about doing this. I find my way here. Oh, I remember I did a funeral one time for a guy in this little town. And he died. It was a sad death because he died alone in his apartment in another town. And he had been dead for 7 days in that apartment because he didn't really seem connected to anybody. He had a dog, and that's why they found him, because the dog was yipping and yelping so much. They finally opened the door. And I remember in this community that I was at, I usually walked around and tried to find somebody who had some memories, right? And usually you're going to find some good memories, sometimes not. In this case, no one would tell me anything. Zero. And I thought, what is going on? They wouldn't say anything about this guy. And finally, I went to this gas station. There was one gas station in this little town that the church told me I wasn't really supposed to go over to be a part of because they drank a lot at that gas station, and they were usually tanked. That's kind of where the town drunks hung out. So I went over there, and I said, hey, do you all know this guy? And there were two town drunks there, and they both looked down, shook their head, and they said, below average, Pastor Brooke, below average. Wow. What do you do? How do you preach a sermon for that? You know, the below average guy who is below average to the two town drunks. I mean, it was not an easy service. But I thought I did a pretty good job of the message because I focused on God's mercy and grace, and I focused on that. And I remember lifting up this person to that wonderful God's grace with quite confidence that God would hold this person no matter what they'd been like. And I felt pretty good about the sermon and the message and the lifting. And the next day, my janitor came running into my office, and he was mad as all get out. He said, you know he didn't go to heaven. You just know he didn't. Come on, you preached him right up to heaven yesterday. You can't do that. And I said, Perry, my job isn't that. My job isn't, I'm not the judge. I'm just the one lifting this person up to a very merciful and loving God. And you can be mad at God, go ahead, but you can be mad at me too, and he was. But have you ever been mad at somebody like that, or just unable to let somebody go because of the pain they've caused? Or because of the pain that event has caused? Many of you know my sister died in a car accident, and I was 13 years old. That's a lot of weight to carry. And our family didn't handle, I don't know if anybody handles it very well, but our family didn't handle it very well. And I was really ticked off at God. And that's one of the things I think we have to sometimes do in these grief times, is we've got to forgive God. I mean, you don't have to. You can hold on to it if you want. But I think at some point, we have to let go of our image of God, is what I'd like to say. This image of God as all controlling. You see, when I was a teenager, it was like, how could God let my loving sister die in a car accident? Come on, what kind of loving God allows that to happen, you know? And that was just what was driving me. And I was ticked off at my dad, too. I thought, what a phony you are. What a stinking phony you are, Dad. How can you preach about God's love when you know that God let your daughter die in a car accident? I just held it, like a badge, And by the way, I was a teenager, so it was kind of fun to be mad at God in a church, sometimes. It was enjoyable to be that guy for a while. And then I got to college, and I was still mad. I still was mad. And I remember my senior year, I kind of fell in love with somebody. And her name was Cindy. You might know her. And I was pretty in love with her. I don't know if she really knew I was in love with her. It took me about a half a year to get to her, at least declare that. But I remember I was in a theater group, and we were doing the stage production, and I was doing stage stuff, and I was really enjoying doing all this stage stuff because I could get next to Cindy, and do some things, paint and talk to her and see if I could get her to laugh. So I was into this, and they had William Sloane Coffin at my school. They invited Reverend William Sloane Coffin to preach. And if you know William Sloane Coffin, Riverside Church, from New York, very famous church. He was probably one of the most famous pastors out of there. And if you remember the Doonesbury comic strip, I don't know if you can put that up there, but this pastor, the preacher in that, if you remember that, that is really Reverend William Sloane Coffin. I mean, his name is Reverend Sloane in the comic strip, but it was a big deal, right? So he was coming to Dakota Wesleyan, my university, to preach, and I wasn't going. I wasn't going to go there, but he happened to be preaching at the theater, and I didn't realize he was preaching. I thought I was coming in to my stage thing, and I thought I was going to see Cindy, so I bursted into the theater, and there was William Sloane Coffin preaching, and I thought, oh boy, I'm in the wrong place, and I almost left, but guess who was sitting there with an open seat? Cindy was there. And so there was an open seat by Cindy, so I thought, oh, okay, I'll suffer through it. So I sat there with Cindy, and I tried to hold her hand. That didn't work, but I tried. William Sloane Coffin started talking about his son, Alex. Alex died in a car accident in Boston. He was drunk, and he was driving, and his car caroused off the edge of the road and into the ocean, basically, into the bay. And he died. And he talks about this story, and of course I'm into this because I've had this experience. And he starts talking about how when he was, just a couple days afterwards, he was sitting at his house with his family, and in came a church woman, a great and wonderful church woman, he said, with 18 quiches, for the family, in Boston you get quiches for funerals, and so she came in and she just kept shaking her head, and she said, I don't know how you can be a preacher. I just don't know how you can be a preacher knowing that God let that happen. That your God let that happen. I just don't understand God. I don't understand the will of God. And William Sloane Coffin just got furious. And even on stage, he was furious. He was shouting and screaming. And I was thinking, all right, finally, a pastor who's mad. I love this guy. And he was screaming and he was screaming and screaming. But what I didn't realize, he wasn't screaming at God. He was screaming at this woman's misunderstanding of the will of God. And he said, God would never allow an unnatural death in this world. That's not our God. Those things happen, yes, but our God does not will them. Our God does not want them to happen. God is totally against that. If you look at the ministry of Jesus, what do you think he's doing most of the time? He's healing people from those unnatural deaths. And God, the reason I worship God, he said finally at the end, is because I know my God, when Alex, his head went under the water and he died, my God was the first one weeping. The first one weeping. That's the God I worship. And let me tell you, that was a game changer. That turned my understanding of God upside down. And immediately I felt the love and the Spirit of God fill my heart and soul. And I even cried a couple tears. And I learned that happens to bring out a hand from somebody I love sometimes. And so it was just a moment for me where I realized in my life that I didn't have to be alone. I didn't have to be mad. I didn't have to hold all this junk, and keep holding it just to prove myself right. That I could let go. And here's what I wrote. And it was then, with me holding the hand of my new girlfriend. Okay, she didn't know it yet, so my soon-to-be girlfriend, okay, it took me a half year to ask her out. That a wave that I can only describe as the warm, embracing wave of God's grace overcame my heart. And I was able, for the first time since that accident, to let go of that image of God that had so withheld me. so prevented me from actually grieving, and embrace a God who didn't control it all, who hated accidental deaths as much as I did, and who now offered his or her or their hand, me, as an offer to walk with me. Not to prevent the pain, but helping me carry the pain. Not making everything perfect, but helping me put the pieces back together in a beautiful but imperfect way. Not rescuing me, but offering me a sacred place where I could let go of the pain and the injustice and learn instead to remember and honor the one I loved, my sister, and who she was and who she still is. And have the giver of that gift, God, right by my side. And I wonder today, do you allow that God to walk by you? What's preventing you from having that God walk beside you? What thoughts? Could you let him go? What understandings of God? Can you let him go and just let that God walk beside you? Is there some injustice that you're still holding on to? Well, let me tell you, it's very lonely. Have to be right. And sometimes just a lot easier to let it go and have a friend instead. And so I invite you, as we remember, as we place flowers on the altar, to let go and let that person be with God fully so you can remember them fully. And all the people said, amen. Speaking of Jubilee, this song is all about Jubilee.
One, two, three.
I can tell by the way you're walking that you don't want company. I'll let you alone and I'll let you walk on. In your own good time you'll be back where the sun can find you, under the wise wishing tree. And all of them made willow under the shade and call it a jubilee.
I can tell by the way you're talking that the past isn't letting you go. There's only so long you can take it all on, then the world's got a key on its own. And when you're ready to leave behind you, you'll look back and all that you'll see is the wreckage and rust that you left in the dust on your way to the Jubilee.
And I can tell by the way you're listening that you're still expecting to hear your name being called like a summons to all who have failed to account for their doubts and their fears. They can't add up too much without you. And so if it were just up to me, I'd take hold of your hand, saying, come hear the band, play your song at the Jubilee.
shame for something you can't even name, that you haven't been able to come to the table. Simply glad that you came. When you feel like this, try to imagine that we're all like frail boats on the sea, just scanning the night for that great guiding light, announcing the Jubilee.
And I can tell by the way you're standing, with your eyes filling with tears, that it's habit alone keeps you turning from home, even though your home is right here, where the people who love you are gathered under the wise wishing tree. May we all be considered and straight on delivered down to the Jubilee.
'Cause the people who love you are waiting, and they'll wait just as long as need be. When the